Well, hello there. I'm Mattias Andersson, and welcome to our Data Analytics Specialty live stream. I am one of the training architects here at A Cloud Guru, and we have a great stream for you today. But I want to introduce you to John Hanna. Now, something you might not know about John is that he keeps 2 calculators in his bedside table just in case. But what matters more to this live stream is that he has co-authored the Data Analytics Specialty course at A Cloud Guru with Brock Toubre. And he is going to go through some questions and answers today, give you some insight on how you can pass that Data Analytics Specialty exam. John, do you want to introduce yourself a little more?
Hi, I'm John Hanna, and I have a little over 15 years of experience in the IT field. I worked for the University of Washington, and before joining Linux Academy and then coming to A Cloud Guru, I worked for Amazon Web Services in premium support, and I touched just about everything Amazon Web Services does working that job, and I've just really embraced the cloud as part of my life because it made all of those things I did as a on-site system administrator so much easier, and so it's been a journey.
Exciting, yes. All right, so how about we start off with you letting us know a little bit about what data analytics is all about and what this data analytics specialty entails.
Yeah, and so to do that, we have a few frequent questions that we've gathered here. So let's get into that. So I get databases, how to use them, but what is big data and data analytics? Big data is data that is essentially too big for a relational database system. And the way we use big data leads us to data analytics. So we have this huge pile of data and we need to analyze it. So those two things become interrelated. So that's really what the exam is about. And in the course, our data analytics specialty course, we use this mental model to frame the services in AWS that we use for the data analytics process. So we're going to define something that we want to analyze, make a hypothesis. It's a very scientific process. We're then going to collect data in relation to that hypothesis. We then need to prepare that data. We can do some data analysis then. And then out of that, we will be able to interpret that data, whether that's generating spreadsheets, we're creating visualizations, we're making reports. That's what's in the data interpretation step. And then discovery is going to lead us to a new hypothesis, which will send us back through the cycle again.
Yeah, so that's a really important thing to understand, I think. Going through this cycle of how data is used and how we manage it in a system, I think that's such a critical thing, not just from the exams perspective, but this is actually how you succeed using data in a real world circumstance. And I think that's one of the key things to understand is that the context here is that the certification is like a marker of capability, but it's actually, can you do these things in the real world that matters? And that's what we want for you. We want you to be able to succeed in the real world. So the exam questions are going to be designed to validate your expertise in realistic situations. Sure, there's going to be some things about them that aren't exactly like your situation is going to be, but there is a lot that you can draw from them. And if you understand how this all works, that's what really makes the difference. I guess one of the questions that people often ask is, how does this certification fit with the other certifications?
Right, and it is, like most of the other AWS certifications, less about whatever the topic is and more about how AWS services are applied to that topic. So it is in some ways an architectural certification. Leading into it, it would be useful to have the database certification, the database specialty certification. If you're not familiar with databases and data systems, that will give you that foundation. And before that, or if you are familiar with databases but less familiar with AWS, the Developer Associate is a good certification to bring into a course or study about this certification. After the certification, really, it does do a lot to set you up for the machine learning certification, which uses a lot of the data analytics structures and systems to do machine learning.
Yeah, that's really awesome. There's a lot of really valuable stuff that you can get out of this. By the way, if you're interested in understanding more about the rest of the AWS certifications, we've got an AWS certification guide that's up on YouTube that we can throw a link in the chat. You can take a look at that and get a sense for how all of them fit together and how, in particular, how you can use them to succeed in your own role, whatever that might be. But all right, so one other question that we often get asked here. Oh, did you want to say something else, John? Or?
No, no. Go ahead.
No? All right. One of the questions we get often is, what are some of the key services that matter for this data analytics specialty certification?
Yeah, so the core services in this certification, we'll start with S3. It's really a foundational service. We need to be able to manage data storage for our data analytics systems. It's a very important piece of it. If you can't store the data, you can't analyze the data. And then there are things like the Kinesis family is pretty heavy in the certification. Athena, obviously, if we're talking about S3 and data. Redshift is a very heavy topic in this certification as AWS's main data warehouse. We have Elastic MapReduce, and then sort of anything around that. So we'll touch on Lambda and other compute services in the questions, and that's really kind of the core of this certification. I'm sure I'm leaving something out, but we have a excellent course, if I do say so myself, on this certification.
And you don't say so yourself. We all say the same thing. No, but honestly, I know it's been helping a lot of people. So it is definitely a great course for you to check out. But today's live stream, we are going to be more interactive. So we would like for you all to interact with us in the chat. So feel free to put your questions in there as we're going, and some of them we'll get to while we're going, and others we'll get to at the end. But one of the key things that we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through some practice exam questions, and we want you to interact by answering what you think the answer is. So we're going to start off with a sample question here, and the sample question, it's just to sort of get a sense for how this works. We're going to give you a small amount of time for the sample question, and we want you to answer in the chat. So if you're ready, let's shift it over to the actual question. Here it is. You have 30 seconds. Starts now. So this might be an easy question for some of you, and for others maybe not, but we want to get your answers in the chat. Personally, I was distracted by option A. That was just, I couldn't get past it. It's just, puppy's so cute. All right, your time is up. We need your answers in the chat. Let's see them come in. All right, we got some. We've got some A's. Yes, people love the puppies. I think maybe not taking this as seriously as we were hoping. Well, you know what? It's not that serious. It's fine.
That's right. This isn't a real question. Well, I mean, it's a real question, but it's not a real question in relation to the exam so much.
Yeah, we've got a number of people answering B as well, so that is an excellent thing. So, do you want to walk us through, John?
Yeah.
How do we go through this?
Yeah, so part of why we do a sample question is so you get a taste for our process here as we work through these questions without the distraction of a real question. So when I sit an exam, what I do is I will read through the question forward. I'll take a quick glance at the answers, and then I work my way backwards through the question, and I try to pull out the relevant information in that question, sort of like how you would work a word problem in math class. We want to pull out the variables and the data that's important and use that to eliminate or lead us to an answer. So we'll read through it forward if you want to do that, Mattias, and then I will.
Oh, sure, yeah, sorry. So in modern computer systems, what is the base atomic unit for data?
Okay, so We've all looked at the answers. So when we work through it backwards, what we will see is we're talking about data. We need the base atomic unit in a modern computer system. So this just kind of separates out our bullet points of what's important in the question. So right away, unfortunately, for people who answered A, we know it's not puppies. It is not one noodle. And so already we're down to a 50% chance of just guessing the answer right, even if we don't know for sure what it is. We, if we dig into our knowledge bank, we know that a byte is 8 bits, and so it's probably not a byte. We can cross that out, which leads us to the correct answer, which is B.
There we go. Done, right? All right.
So sorry for the puppy lovers, but it's a bit.
You,
Just a
you can
bit,
all
sorry.
imagine. Someone was noting that if bit were the fundamental unit, there would be some chaos going on. That would be a very interesting world. But all right, we've got to move on and get to something a little bit more interesting, and that's why we're here, right? So we're going to get into some real questions. Well, one of the
But before
things.
we do that, we do have an exam tip, which is
Oh,
we talked
love
about
it.
already, which is scanning through the question backwards can help detach important information from the question narrative.
Indeed. It's an important thing to remember. All right,
That's
so
right.
for the real questions, we're going to give you 2 minutes. And 2 minutes, there's a reason for that. John, do you want to walk us through why we're giving 2 minutes for these
Yeah.
questions?
So on the actual exam, you get 180 minutes for your exam. There are 65 questions. And so at about 2 minutes, if you don't have an answer, then it's probably a good idea to budget some of that time, flag that, put in a guess answer, because you just want an answer there in case you do run out of time. Flag the question for review, and then you can come back to it at the end of the exam if you have time to do that. And that way you will answer more questions than not, and you can follow a time budget, and you're more likely to pass the exam.
I think that word budget is a really interesting one, right? It's an important thing to understand that when you're going through a certification exam, it's not about getting every single question right, which you may do, but probably won't. What really matters is that you're showing enough expertise by going through all of the questions and getting as many of them as you can correct. So you need to get enough of them right. And if you're spending your entire exam time on just a few questions, you can't demonstrate your expertise on the rest of them. So we suggest that you budget yourself 2 minutes. You have a bit more than that, right? But 2 minutes really is a valuable thing to be targeting, especially in practice. So that when you're in the real exam, you can definitely come in under that amount of time for a lot of questions, and then you have a bit more time for review and for the really the doozy questions that you might hit. So, all right. Well, I think that we are ready to move on now to the actual question. So, if we can get, I will take a look at our timer when the question pops over. We will start it. All right. Time starts now. 2 minutes. 30 seconds through, you should have finished reading the question and definitely moving on to the responses. Trying to understand them all. Halfway through our 2 minutes, so hopefully you've eliminated a response already, maybe. And you're definitely trying to figure out how they compare. 20 seconds through, 30 seconds left. You should be definitely trying to clinch a particular response by this time if you can. I see some responses are coming in. That's good. I see some C's and some B's coming in the chat. Quite a split, YouTube versus Twitch at the moment. All right, we are done. Our time is up, so I definitely need you to get your responses into the chat. Even if you aren't sure, you just have to answer something. It's better to answer something and be wrong than it is to leave it blank. So from the perspective of this practice that we're doing, it's important to lock in a response so that you can be honest with yourself about what you actually would have answered in the actual exam. But also from the perspective of an exam, you may not get the chance to come back to that question, and especially not reread it and re-understand it as well as you did the first time through. So go with your gut, put something in, move on, flag it if you need to, but it's definitely an important thing. So, all right, well, our question right now, we were taking a look at, this is the way mercantile. So, John, do you want to walk us through your thought process of how you pull out the information from this question?
Sure, yeah, excuse me. Yeah, so right away, we're going to work backwards through it. And the first thing we're going to notice here is a little thing, we call it a kicker, or just, I like end clue. It's something that will be in the question. There are several common ones. Lowest latency possible is going to be an important piece of information. It's one of those things that if you see it in the question, okay, that's going to guide our answer. We also need a SQL endpoint. That could be important. There's API endpoints and SQL endpoints and all kinds of different ways we might be connecting with our data. We do not want to perform a full ETL. This is one of those things you love to see on a work request. It's like, oh, okay, we're going to design something difficult. And then our data is spread over EC2, RDS, DynamoDB, as well as archives in S3. So we need something that is able to access all of that data in one place and provide a SQL endpoint. And then produce analytics reports from all of the data in their AWS account. So that's a little vague, but it's probably referring to those services down below. And so when we pull that out, this sort of medium-long question doesn't look quite as long anymore. So when I'm looking at,
painful when you read the description of where all their data is. I think that's a realistic thing that a lot of people have felt before, right?
Yeah, this question may be a little too real for some people. I've definitely seen scenarios like this before.
Think about the puppies after this whole thing, and then you'll still be able to sleep at night.
That's right. Yeah, that's why we put the puppies up front. That's your safe place.
That's a happy place, yeah.
So when I look at these answers, we have lowest latency. That's important, but there's also we need to consider real world things as well. So how much work is it going to be to do these things? So when I look at A right away, that's a huge project. That's going to take planning teams. You're going to need project managers. You're going to need software developers. I'm going to get rid of A right away because I know that's just too much work. Even if I can make a really low latency solution, it's not very realistic. And then going back to that lowest latency, between the remaining answers, Athena is probably not going to be the lowest latency. It could be, but again, we don't know for sure. And generally, when we see something like that on one of these questions, they're testing to see if you know if there is a more expensive but lower latency option available in the answers. So I'm going to cross out C. And then looking at answer D, I know that Spark isn't really a query language. It can be used that way, and the real gotcha is that in the question, we're dealing with a huge amount of data, and Spark can query data and it can filter data, but it has to load it all into memory for each query. And so if your data set is really large, like what we're talking about here, it's not going to be workable. So let's get rid of D, which leaves us with the correct answer, which is B. We're going to utilize a glue crawler to build a catalog of all of the disparate data, configure Elastic MapReduce to use the glue data catalog for Hive tables, and use EMR to query the disparate data from a single endpoint. EMR can collect data from all of these places, it can query them, and we can use Glue to run a regular crawl against these data sources. So let's say DynamoDB is still in use in the application, being actively added to. There's archives updated in S3 on a regular interval. We can set up our Glue crawler to crawl that data regularly, which will update our Hive tables. And we've got a nice endpoint with very little development effort to set up our SQL endpoint to query that data.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, is that you really do need to make sure that you understand the way that the things are going to work, right? So if you understand how Athena is going to work and understand how Spark is going to work when it actually has to process that stuff, then you can think through, well, what does that mean and does that line up? So what is your tip here for us, John?
Our tip here, one second. Our tip is pay close attention to phrases like lowest latency, lowest cost, least development effort. These are often pointers to the correct answer. So these are those kickers.
Yeah, like you said, the kicker. It's a dead giveaway if they're giving a particular dimension to you. You definitely need to take a look at that and not forget it. So one of the suggestions I often have is to come back at the end and make sure that what you've chosen as the correct answer does actually line up with that. So it's kind of a different spin on making sure that you're paying attention to this kicker. So excellent, excellent job to all of those who said B. Well, all right. I think we are getting ready to move on to the next question. Do we have it ready? We do. When it
We're ready to
starts,
go.
when it shows up, then we will start your 2 minutes. Now. 'I see some answers are already coming in. We're coming up on 1 minute left. Seconds left. Should definitely be, if you're not already trying to settle on a response, especially for a shorter question, it's a good idea to see if you can lock it in early. Got Twitch saying A and D. Same thing on YouTube. A and D. All right, last few seconds here. Get your answers in. If you haven't answered, do it now. Do it now. Please, please. All right, your time is up. That was 2 minutes. So we have got a glue crawler that we're going through that's going to make us a glue data catalog. So how do we want to pull out important information, John?
Yeah, so right away we need to enable access to S3 bucket for glue. So we're looking at right away, I'm thinking this is probably a security question, and we're dealing with a service to service security situation. Uh, we have data located in S3 bucket. We kind of already know that, but just for the sake of completeness, we'll include that. And we need to populate a glue data catalog. So we'll pull that out. It was a pretty short question, so we have a fairly short list of points, but as you can kind of tell already from the split between A and D, there is some nuance in the answer here. So the shorter looking question is a little more complicated than it first appears. So right away, we're dealing with a service-to-service authentication. We can get rid of answer B. Cognito is not going to let us do that. Technically, answer C is correct-ish, but it would not be best practices. You would need to either be logged in to the web console as that IAM user and fire your glue crawler every time you want to crawl your data, or you would need to get the access key and secret key for that user and put it into a Lambda function or onto an EC2 instance that runs a script that fires that crawler. And while there are ways to manage that secret material securely, we have better options. So we're going to get rid of C. And then while D looks correct, the role is not going to give glue temporary security credentials necessarily. It does on the back end technically, but it still has it all the time. It can use it whenever it wants. It can generate new ones. So technically D is not correct, and that just has to do with the details in that answer, which leaves us with answer A. Just create an IAM role with the appropriate permission policy to access the S3 bucket and assign the role to glue. So glue now has permission to run that crawler whenever you want. You can set it up on a schedule, and you don't need to worry about the permission. We also have a single point of management for that role. Say we no longer want that crawler to be able to access that data. We can pull that through IAM with all the rest of our IAM roles that we're using for glue, and we can control that access there in case we need to manage it rather quickly, and it centralizes all of that information.
Yeah, so it didn't seem like anyone really got confused by B or C, and I think that's a really great thing. I think a lot of people were a bit thrown off by how similar D and A were, and I think that that's a little bit of a I don't know. It feels a little bit mean because you know that roles are giving you temporary security credentials, but I think the way that it's phrased is what really sort of makes it feel a little odd. You're not assigning temporary security credentials to the crawler. You're assigning a role that will, and when the crawler runs, use those credentials. It'll create a token out of it when it needs it. But it's not. It's kind of a
Yeah,
nuanced thing there, right? So
yeah, it's transparent. You don't need to be aware that it's getting those temporary credentials. So while technically correct, it's off a little bit, and we don't need to know that to make it work.
Yeah. So if you answered D, don't feel bad. Honestly, I think this is a really good opportunity for you to take a look at, well, what was it that made you lean towards D instead of A? And ask yourself, would you do the same thing in the future? I think that's something that you could get some value out of. All right. Well, do you have any other comments about this, or do you want to move on to your tip? Oh, you want to move
No,
on to your
just
tip?
we'll move on to the tip because it's kind of a seemingly simple question can be hiding complexity and the nuance needed to get to the correct answer. So, as we saw there is some nuance, and it is, sometimes the simplest answer is the correct one. That's often when I'm at that 50-50 split, I'll go, are they presenting me with the easiest option as sort of a look how great this setup is and how easy it is, and often I'll choose that if I'm not 100% sure, just because often that is what the question is doing, is testing to see if you know the easy way to do something.
Yeah, I think not getting trapped by things that are more complex than they need to be is one of the things another way of sort of putting this tip, I think. Actually, one other thing I'd like to call out about this question is that security is sort of the core here. Like the question isn't how do you use glue? The question is how do you set things up securely? Why is that, John? Why do you have a security
Well, yeah, I mean,
specific
it
question?
looks like a glue question, right? But it's actually an IAM question.
Hmm.
And security is important. Data is the core of what we do, which was
It's
kind
important.
of what drew me into the information systems area of information technology is like what is the most important thing we have in any of our system, what is actually the currency that generates revenue from the things we build, and it's the data in that system. So security is pretty top of the list in terms of things we need to be aware of when we're designing our data analytics systems, and you will see a fair amount of security questions on the exam.
Isn't there a whole domain on the exam which is
There
all
is,
about security?
there is indeed, and if I
Yeah, so
recall correctly, don't quote me on this. It's about 22% of the score, so
write
it's a
that down,
pretty
people.
big, yeah,
I'm not allowed to quote him, but you can feel free to quote him if you
yeah.
want. So, no. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, security is such an important thing. It's a cross-cutting concern. It's all of our responsibility. If you don't know how to do security properly, if you can't be building things securely, you can't be building things professionally. So it's just such an important thing. Hey, just harkening back for 1 second to the previous question, somebody was pointing out that that's a lot of different places that EMR is sourcing data. Is there like any limit to where EMR can get its data?
Uh, I would have to look at documentation, and again, that's it's one of those things about, is the exam representing the real world? No one works with any of these systems in a vacuum. You'll have reference available. You can spend a lot of time trying to memorize everything. I don't do that anymore. I know that I can't store all of this information in my head. What I've done is practice getting really good at finding things in reference information. So, is there a limit to what EMR can connect to? Sure. All of the things listed in that question are valid data sources for EMR, and EMR does give you operating system level access. So technically, there isn't really a limit,
There you
because
go.
if
Yeah.
say you have some other system that's not there's not a pre-packaged connector for EMR, you can go make your own and put it on your EMR cluster, and there you go. So it's more a limit of what glue can crawl, because it's providing that hive table to EMR, which is then going to go out and access that data uh, more than what EMR is able to connect to.
Excellent. Thanks. All
And I
right.
also
Well,
don't, I don't, I don't know without looking what the glue limitations are, but it definitely can crawl all of the things listed in that question.
yeah, I would actually point out to people that that's not a bad and wrong thing, right? Like you said, you have access to the documentation in the real world when you need to. I think that the key thing from an exam perspective is that if you're familiar enough with all of the services, you know what is right. And if it's looking fishy, you're like, wait a minute, I've never seen that connected before. That's a weird way. That's sort of the expertise kicking in, right? It doesn't mean that you've memorized the documentation. That's actually not useful. What matters is that you are finding the places where you should be looking into those details. And in an exam situation, I think that's enough in most cases to lead you to one of the other response options where you will see, oh, wait a minute, that one is a good option. That's the one I need to settle on. And then based on that evaluation, you'll wind up with the right response. So, all right, well, I think it's time for us to move on to our next question. And you're welcome, Ernest. I'm saying you're welcome for John. So, all right, we are starting our timer. We're 30 seconds through. One minute through. I see responses coming in. Excellent. "30 seconds left. Try to settle on something." "10 seconds. Gotta put some answer in. Even if you're not sure. No shame. All right, time's up. Our 2 minutes is done. So, I love this particular company, and this is a very fun system that Percival's Peculiar Pickles is building. We've got a number of B and C responses on YouTube. We've got some A responses on Twitch. Do you want to lead us through our thought process here? How should we process this question?
Sure. When I look at this question right away, the kicker is really important in this one. So minimal development effort. We need to generate visualizations of the data stored in the system. We need to provide a REST API interface. So that also is a clue which is going to point you pretty much straight at the correct answer. And we need to perform search and analytics. When we're talking about AWS data analytics systems, there's really only one service that is going to provide us with a very robust fuzzy text search service, which also is going to lead us to the correct answer. So right away, I can use the kicker in this question to go through our answers and eliminate pretty much all of them. Answer D is going to require a ton of development effort. We're also leaving that EC2 infrastructure in place, which not great. That's not this question. I'm sorry. So we're utilizing EC2, which is there are better options out there, and we're also going to have to do a ton of development for answers B as well as A, which leaves us with answer C, which is utilize Kinesis Firehose to deliver data from the various elements of the application to an Elasticsearch service cluster, provide Elasticsearch API and Kibana endpoints to the customer with the appropriate security credential information. So if we look at this answer, if we know that Kinesis Firehose can deliver data directly to Elasticsearch with just a configuration, so there's no development there, getting the data loaded into our service, and that Elasticsearch provides us with that search API that we need. And we can use Kibana, which is prepackaged on our Elasticsearch service domains, to generate visualizations as well as perform various analytics queries, which we can do through the Elasticsearch API as well. Then C is obviously our correct answer. But again, if I see this question and I see minimal development effort, I don't need to know a ton to get to answer C, because I can go through and go, that's anything that says create a custom API, we're going to throw that out right away. And so while knowing all the details will make you more sure of your answer here, if you didn't know a ton about the services in C, you could still go, well, it's not talking about creating an API or developing any kind of data processing systems that are custom, that's probably the correct answer.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work to try to deal with your own text search, right? Like that is not a trivial piece of effort to be managing all of that. So if you can take advantage of something, then hey, I mean that's the point, right? Like that the whole purpose of all of these services is so that we can take advantage of them and not have to keep reinventing the wheel. Leave all of that undifferentiated heavy lifting, as they love to say at AWS, leave it to them. So
That's right.
now, one of the interesting things when we were going through this question that stood out to me is that I didn't realize that Kibana came pre-installed with the Elasticsearch, and I think that's a really interesting thing that you're getting so much extra stuff, because a lot of times when you are using Elasticsearch, if you're doing it on your own, you're also going to want Kibana to support or to front that, right? So that you have an easier way of getting at all of that data. So yeah, so that's definitely a useful thing to understand, and the process here to think through. So, all right. So, someone was asking which solution in that answer served up the images in the end. So, what part of it was actually?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Kibana can generate visualizations of the data. So, and it can actually generate a blanking on the word now. You can add live Kibana dashboards to your web applications, and they will stay updated to the data that's in your Elasticsearch cluster. So it's actually a really powerful system if you need to have live graphs and so forth. You can certainly use things like Grafana to do that as well, but if you already have this running and it has the resources available in the cluster for you, why not use that? And then you have a live graphical representation of your data that is updated in your web interface for the people who are not going to log into Kibana and generate their own queries to create those visualizations.
Yeah, so again, you wind up with minimal development effort, right? You only have to develop the key
Yeah,
piece
it's
for your
yeah,
users, and then all of the rest of the stuff you're taking advantage of from what AWS is offering. So
yeah. It's just a copy and paste to embed it into your web interface once you are have that visualization looking the way you want. That was the word
excellent.
I lost there.
But I would always caution when you copy paste some code, make sure you understand it as well. So, all
Absolutely,
right,
yeah.
what is your tip for us, John?
So our tip is flag questions you are unsure of, which we've talked about a little bit. You can return to them after answering the rest of the questions on the exam. You should put a guess answer in there when you flag it, just in case you don't have time to come back to it. But typically, if you're using that time budgeting strategy, you will have time to review those questions and see if maybe some other question has released some information in your brain that makes that question more clear.
Cool. All right, good tip. So let's move on to our question number 4. And I need you all to be paying attention, because this is an interesting one. When the slide changes, I will start our timer.
Okay, here we go.
Time starts now. Feel free to put your answers in the chat if you have them, but I think you might need a little more time. That was 30 seconds. We're a minute through now. We're going to give you 30 seconds more. This is probably not the question that most people are going to bank extra time on, but try to settle on something. Excellent. People are answering. Good, good. 10 seconds left. We're out of time. That was 2 minutes. That probably felt pretty tough. So, in the exam,
this is a very, very information dense question.
It really is. Yeah, in the exam, you may well wind up using a little bit of your extra buffer. So if you answered that security question after 1 minute, you might take 3 on this one. You still can't take 20 minutes on any question. So despite the difficulty, you cannot be wrestling with them forever. I do suggest that you feel free to do that in your practicing. To go ahead, and I've spent hours just walking through questions when I was practicing, but when you're in, you have to get yourself to the point where you can answer them quickly enough so that you can move through all the questions. So this is a long question. Do you want to walk us through the key information, John?
Yeah. And this is one of those questions that really makes that key information strategy stand out. So when we go back through it backwards, we're going to end up with a much smaller amount of information we need to keep in our head and figure out exactly what we're talking about. So we're going to decouple, it decouples collection, transformation, and processing data, as well as serving the web interface. So we're talking about a system that's doing a lot of things all in one place. The user is experiencing issues with data loss and data processing failures. So if we think about this as we're coming at this as a consultant that's been brought in to fix this system, then we're talking about our client is having loss and processing failures. And we're using EC2 instances that serve out a JavaScript web interface. So the JavaScript is an interesting little detail. It doesn't just say a web interface, so that stuck out to me. EC2 instances using auto-scaling to scale up during high demand. So we know that the demand on this system is not consistent. There's some sort of demand wave that happens throughout the process of a day or a week or whatever that is. We don't really need to know that. So when we pull that out, it's still a lot of information, but it's a lot more manageable. And I end up liking questions like this when I'm taking the exam because it's not vague. Normally when I get through reading the answers, I know which one it is because I've been handed so much information that even if I am not 100% sure on all the services involved, there's going to be enough there that's going to lead me to one answer. So right away, I'm going to knock out the answers that are using that EC2 architecture, starting with D. It's just there's better options. And again, that JavaScript web interface is a clue that maybe we don't need an active web server. Maybe our entire web interface is static. And again, this is one of those things where you go back to the person who hired you as a consultant and say, hey, can we do this? What does your web application actually look like? And in the context of the exam, it's just a clue that we probably don't need EC2. So I'm going to knock out D and C right away. And then we're down to, again, that 50% chance. So even if we just pull out that EC2 tidbit when we're reading through really quickly the first time, we know we can get rid of 2 of those, and now we have a 50% chance of getting this rather large looking question correct. Looking at the remaining answers, I know that Kinesis data streams can't load data straight into S3. So that's going to tell me that we're going to either have to develop something that moves that data from the data stream into S3, or there's a better option here. I do know that Kinesis data hoses can load data straight into S3, which leaves us with answer A, which will be our correct answer. So loads the clickstream data into S3 using Kinesis Data Firehose. Use EMR to ingest, transform, and process the data using Apache Spark. So there's Spark. We're talking about clickstream data, so it's going to be in manageable chunks to load into memory. Use the Redshift copy command to load the data from EMR into your Redshift cluster. And finally, use CloudFront and S3 to host the web interface. That's another little hint in there with Redshift. There is one answer that has insert instead of copy. Insert is less efficient than copy, because what copy is going to do is actually read the data from wherever it's stored, which is typically an S3 bucket, and load it into our Redshift cluster. So if we're going to fill out that answer, EMR is going to ingest, transform, and process the data and put it back into S3, where Redshift will pick it up and load it into the cluster.
Yeah, this is a beast of a question. A shout out to M. Flockenhaus on Twitch for getting the right answer here. A lot of other people, there's no shame in putting in your wrong answers. That was actually a really good thing. So now the question to ask yourself is, if you were in that same situation, would you notice some of those small details? Would the things that led you to that, would they stick out to you next time around? And to be honest, there are going to be some questions that you probably will miss in the exam. I mean, it's extremely uncommon for anyone to get 100%, right? But that's not the bar. That's not what matters. In a real world situation, you'd be going and double checking things. You'd be talking with your colleagues to make sure that this is a good approach, and you wouldn't be caught up on that 2-minute timer, right? You'd be doing it properly then. But in the exam, you still have to put down an answer, and yeah, so it's definitely good to put the answer down, but it's also really important to pay such close attention to those little tiny differences between the responses. They can make all the difference.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
really good.
I didn't pass this exam the first time I sat it, and my scores are not something I would brag about on a lot of the exams. But like I said, an exam is not a simulation of the real world. You don't work with any of these things in a vacuum in real life. You're going to have references. You can go double check things before you commit to a real world answer to someone asking, how do I architect this data analytics system? Very rarely are you going to be in a situation where you have to give them an answer right that second, just off the top of your head. It's more like, hey, in a couple days, I'd like to see a proposal for a data analytics system that fits these parameters. So, I don't worry too much about my scores as long as I pass, because I know that it's not the real world and it's not a test of how I would operate in the real world given these questions. But it does, you need to have the hooks there to be able to go use that reference material, which is one of the things that the exam is testing. Do you know enough about this to be able to go and find what you need to know to make this work in the real world in a very diverse and complicated scenario, which you will see fairly often in data analytics?
Indeed. Now, before we move on to the tip and the question and answer time, so get your questions ready, by the way, everyone. There was a question about how CloudFront fits into this. I think the question was just like, how are we using CloudFront and S3? Why would we feel like that's an okay thing to use for the web interface?
Right. So again, that clue, the JavaScript web interface, it doesn't just say web interface. If it just said web interface, my selection of answers would be totally different, because I wouldn't know, well, JavaScript, this may be a totally static website in terms of what our servers need to do. We're passing off any computing and processing to our user's browser with JavaScript. We can probably host that in S3. CloudFront provides caching for us and several actually security features, some DDoS remediation, and it will reduce the bill of actually serving that JavaScript and the HTML straight out of S3. So that's where this comes in. It's kind of one of those little, do you have all of the foundational knowledge about AWS services? Because that will come up in the real world, where I I didn't write this question, but I like this question a lot because it is got a lot of real world things going on. It's never just data analytics. You're going to be dealing with some sort of interface. It's that discovery part of your data analytics cycle where you're looking at what does this data do. Maybe we have a system where we're kind of, the discovery isn't just an aha moment. It's going to be a situation where we need to watch what's happening in our data system for a number of days or weeks or months to know what's going on. So that sort of web hosting interface stuff will come in the real world as well as on the exam.
Yeah, and if you can go with a serverless architecture, that sounds like a good idea to me. So yeah, that you offload so much more of the work. You don't have to be managing all that stuff. So it's trying to pick out those clues, and it is a really useful approach. So let's move on to the tip and then get to the Q&A.
There we go. Seemingly complex questions can be hiding an easy answer in the details. So I feel like that was an example of that in our last question. And it's definitely something to look out for. And like I said, I really like those longer questions when I'm sitting the exam, because when I see them at first, there is that shock of, oh, that's a lot of information that I need to take in and understand. But it's also when I get to the answers, normally I know which one it is right away because I've been handed so much information. So it's a trade-off in terms of, am I going to be spending time agonizing over which one of the short, vague answers is the correct one, or will I be spending more time reading to get to the correct answer?
Yeah, if you can find certain key pieces of information that eliminate a response, go with that and try to move on and get to the end of the question. And if you're not sure, you can flag it like we suggested before, but it is definitely a valuable thing to try to find those small things and then use that to eliminate responses. So, all right, well, we're interested to hear what your plans are. Do you want to? Oh, sorry, Janet, want to add something, John?
Me. What my? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say to the viewers out there, what are
Oh,
your plans for taking the exam, or did you find this valuable? What are some other questions that you might have? We want to answer your questions and we want to support you to do well on your exams, and like we said at the beginning, not just the exams, but also in your real world roles. So so let us know what your questions are and what you're planning on doing. I see someone's preparing for CSA Pro and looking at data analytics as a specialty. That's definitely a useful thing here. So would the suggestion be to take data analytics before the solutions architect professional? What would you say, John?
I have not taken the CSA Pro yet. It is on my
Okay.
list of exams coming up here that I would like to sit. Um, so it's hard for me to give a full answer for that, but having sat the associate solutions architect and working with AWS services a lot, my instinct is there's not a ton of overlap between the CSA Pro and the data analytics. But again, having that CSA Pro is probably going to shore up that foundation of AWS services that are going to help you with those little things like, well, what is CloudFront and S3 doing in this data analytics question? Why are we talking about hosting a web interface? The CSA Pro will help you contextualize that information.
Yeah.
But like I said, I have not sat the CSA Pro, and I did sit and pass the data analytics certification. So you don't need to. I don't think the data analytics will help you with the CSA Pro, having looked
Hmm.
at what's on it and kind of started preparing to sit that exam.
Interesting. I might have a slightly differing opinion here. I would say that at least going through the course could probably give you a lot of insight into some of the services that you wouldn't necessarily dig into as much. So they are going to show up as a part of architectures that are in the CSA Pro, but it's just that they're kind of like by the way sort of parts of it rather
Mm-hmm.
than the core focus. So I think your point, John, about how the details of the data analytics exam are going to be too much. They're not going to show up. You're not going to need to know the specifics of all of the Glue data catalog sort of options and abilities and all the different details there. I don't think you're going to have to know it at that level. But I think that, as you mentioned at the beginning, the architectures are such a core part of this data analytics exam. I think that then that would give you better insight also into the architectures, even if it's just one of the pieces in the Solutions Architect Professional. So I would say that it's not a requirement, but it wouldn't hurt either, especially because the Solutions Architect Professional has such a large scope that picking off a piece at a time to focus on, even if you don't take the exam, can just be a useful way for you to get familiar with it, so that instead of it being like, oh, what was that again? You're like, oh, I remember this. I've gone through this stuff. And you're like, oh, yeah, of course. Well, that's easy. That's common sense now. Now it's common sense to you because you're familiar with it, right? But that's exactly the expertise that's showing because you will have gone through that. So I definitely... I would not say that it's required, but I would definitely say that you could get value, especially if you went through the course. So, hey, I see some shout outs. People are appreciating the format that we've got, this Q&A format. So that's good to hear. Appreciate that. Question: what are your tips to choose between Glue and EMR? Do you have any tips now?
Yeah, so that's one of those kickers, right? Is typically you're going to say what is the lowest cost, right? That'll be a clue that Glue is going to be the correct answer. Digging into it deeper, Glue is more purpose built than EMR. Like I said, EMR, you have OS operating system level access to the nodes in your EMR cluster, so you can do pretty much whatever you want with them. So if you need flexibility, if you're talking about a complex system that's going to fall outside of what Glue is able to do, which is really cataloging data and then being able to with Glue jobs actually perform ETL and filtering and all of those things. Glue is more purpose built for that, and so EMR is a Swiss Army knife of data analytics in that it can access a ton of different data sources. You can do pretty much anything with it because you have that operating system level access. So that's kind of where those two fall. EMR is going to be significantly more expensive. It is not a serverless service, and so that needs to be, what am I doing? What is the budget? And again, that's where you look for that lowest cost kicker. But EMR, I love EMR. EMR is a great service. I love Glue too. I like both of them, but I meant to say Glue. I love Glue. It definitely made a lot of things easier. Again, it's that like transition from I'm working in a data center and a server dies, and now I have to either contact our support for that and get a replacement shipped to me, and I've got to go plug it in and reprovision it. Whereas if I'm in EC2 and an EC2 instance fails, I'm going to yank it out of its load balancer so I can do forensics on what went wrong, and the auto scaling group will automatically replace it, and I don't have to worry about it. And it happens in like a minute's time scale as opposed to an hours or days time scale. EMR and DMS are kind of that, they're more complicated. They have a little more flexibility, whereas Glue is purpose built. It's easy to use, and as long as I'm within that purpose, it's going to make my life a lot easier.
Cool, cool. Well,
I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. And if you have more questions, you can definitely join us on the Discord. We've got. Did you have something more you want to say, John?
No, I'll put this up as well. Our personal contact information if you have some questions.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's definitely a place you can reach out and throw your virtual Rotten Tomatoes or send us your, I don't know, appreciation. Let us know what you think. That we definitely enjoy interacting with people. More questions as well. But also the Discord is a great place to ask questions because there are a whole boatload of people there, and both other learners.
And Mattias and I hang out there and chat with people, and
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
it is a good, a generally quick turnaround. No promises there, but there are lots of other people there. There's lots of expertise. It's a good place to chat about these things, and maybe look at other cloud providers in case your company decides to go multi-cloud on you.
I think it's important to understand what's out there, even if you're in a situation where you're currently using one. Being informed is not a bad thing. So yeah, well, we really appreciate you all taking the time to spend it with us here today. We hope that you've gotten value out of it, and we hope that you go and smash your exams. I see a number of
Yes.
people heading out to some exams, SA Pro, data analytics. Go for it. I'm sure you'll do well, and look forward to chatting with you more on the Discord. And yeah, well, I guess
Yeah.
keep
Thank
being
you.
awesome, Cloud Gurus. Take care of yourselves.